Where do ideas come from? If you're just going to regurgitate what someone else has said or what someone else has done, readers are going to see through that. You can't do what worked 20 years ago and expect it to have the same impact. The internet is new every single day. You don't want people to be opening a bunch of pages and spend less than a second. Data isn't actually direction, it's listening. What did well and why? What didn't do well and why? What was the most surprising thing in the data? Companies that don't work together and don't collaborate effectively can't be successful, because then you have resources competing against one another and you can't have an ego. You're never going to run out of ideas. Make sure that you are open to inspiration in every aspect of your life.
Tell me about your content marketing philosophy and how has it evolved over time?
Well, I think for content marketing, I think it's bigger to think about content in general. And then we go even bigger and we think about storytelling. And when you're in a content marketing position or a writing position, you need to think about who you are telling the story to. What do they need in their lives? How can you help them? And then once you figure out who your audience is and how you can help them, then you should create the story. Then you should look to the medium, because at the end of the day, stories can have many, many different expressions, especially in the internet where I primarily work in today. It can be a podcast, it can be a photograph, it can be a video, it can be a written article, or it can be an infographic. So you can figure out what expression that story should have based on who the audience is, where they are, how you're going to reach them, and how you can help them.
We hear a lot about, know your audience, find your search intent, all of that. But a lot of that, I know this from experience, a lot of that can be made up, right? It's imaginary. And we say that we know our audience, but we don't, right? So tell me about how you've gotten to know your audience. And I'm especially interested in the neuro element of this, and starting to reverse engineer what you see.
Well, I have to caveat again, I started college studying neuroscience. I did switch to English, which is a very strange transition, but I still think about organic chemistry and how I moved from studying the brain to studying language. But I think they're actually obviously pretty interconnected, because language is effectively the math that we use to store and share knowledge. And so if you think about it algorithmically, the structure of an actual sentence, you can sort of think about an atom could be a subject or a verb, and like how they mold together, but just getting pretty nerdy in there. But when you think about audience distribution and all of that, it definitely can feel pretty witchy. There are trends that move so quickly, from radio is dead to podcasts are a $20 billion industry, to nobody reads email anymore, to newsletters are the hottest thing, and there are unicorn companies that are now focusing on email. And so I think when it comes to studying your audience, you do really just need to think about where they are now. And you can answer that question through conversations, right? So if you're targeting a real estate industry, talk to people in the real estate agents in the industry, talk to the leadership there, find out what they read, find out what they care about, do some data studying, look at market research. And then, as we talked about previously, the most important thing is to remember the human being at the end of the strategy that you're trying to reach. Sometimes when, things are missing the mark, for example, in a content strategy that I've worked on, I will just go back to the basics and I will ask my team, okay, looking at this, we've done all this research, all this reading. What is our reader's name? What did they have for breakfast? What are their hobbies? What's their wife's name? Do they have a wife? What are the things that they care about? And when you can imagine the person, when you can really see the individual in the audience, you can figure out how to help them. and then the audience distribution, like the distribution strategy, can follow.
Now, we were talking. I want to pick on the data element a little bit more because we were talking about this in the pregame, and you've got this really interesting approach where you've talked about you look at the data. You self-proclaimed data nerd. How does that influence your approach and the philosophy on how you've created and lead the people that you're creating with?
Yeah, I think data is one of the coolest evolutions of media from the 18 years that I've been in media. It used to be whatever's on the front page of the paper, depending on how many newspapers it sold, it was a good story or not, right? Like that was sort of the only metric, or circulation, how many people signed up for it after that month. Now we can see data as granular as, like, when did people stop scrolling down the page? What did they click on? How did they get there? What was the action that they took? How long they're not only on that page, but also in that session? There's all of these engagement metrics that we can look at. But I think it's really important to understand that data isn't actually direction, it's listening, right? It's inspiration. So you're having this conversation every single day where you get to put something out there in the world. And then there's this democratic process where the world will tell you if they liked it or not. And you can then take that information and say, okay, I'm going to do 50 more stories about that. I'm going to transform it into a video because I want people to stay on the page longer. I'm going to get this on social super fast because I know that people are engaging with this story. And I am going to maximize this piece and make sure it's told in every different medium to every different audience member because it's doing well. But that could be entirely wrong because it's doing well on the website and in the written form. It doesn't mean that it's supposed to be told in other forms and other mediums. And so making sure you're not only looking at the data, but also asking that question and asking those smart questions. And one of the things that I think is also really important is for storytellers to really learn and think about the metrics that add value to the work that they're doing. So if you're getting, input that you need to create multiple page views for a website, for example, you don't want to create those page views by increasing your bounce rate. You want people to spend time on those pages. You don't want people to be opening a bunch of pages and spend less than a second, right? That's actually not valuable content. And that's a misunderstanding of the data or, the destination. I think that part of data analysis in particular is looking at what did well and why, what didn't do well and why, what was the most surprising thing in the data, and where are you inspired? Where do you think you can learn from this, or why are you not going to move forward? When I have workshops, I love to start with data and ask these questions because everyone has a different answer. Everybody sees this differently. And only through that collaboration, in many ways, with the reader, you can come up with the steps forward.
All right. So, two questions that kind of come to mind for me on that is so, how are you taking the strategic bets based on the data that you're seeing, right? Because there's obviously a collaboration process, which you're kind of hinting at when you're talking about talking with both your readers, but then also your internal stakeholders. So, that's one. And then two, how are you avoiding creating sort of more samey content based on what you're seeing? Because uh, we both know that it can be very challenging for businesses who want to take risks. If it's not broke, don't try and fix it, right? So what's that evolution look like?
Well, I think whenever you're creating a content strategy, maybe it's 75%, meat and potatoes. That's what I would call it. Like, let's make sure that we're providing the protein that runs the business that we know the audience really loves. But then you also need room, any good meal, for an appetizer and a dessert. And if you think about making sure there's always room for 25% at least experimentation and risk taking, then it's going to be healthy. And then the new patterns are going to emerge. It's also important to remember that the internet is new every single day. You can't do what worked 20 years ago today on the internet and expect it to have the same impact. Right? You can, I'm sure, recall when quizzes were the hottest form of content on the internet. And it wasn't just about discovering what type of Disney character you were, it was also about discovering your management style. And you could take this quiz, and people could not get enough of it. But then, because people couldn't get enough of it, the trend, it was a flash in the pan. And now, if you're going to do a quiz, it's not just a guaranteed bet that it's going to work. It's got to be the right way to tell the story. If a quiz is the truest, most successful expression of that story and something you know your audience will engage with, then yeah, go for that quiz. That's one of the tools in your arsenal. But you can't expect yesterday to work today or tomorrow.
It's interesting you bring up quizzes because BuzzFeed comes to mind for, because obviously they were like the big quiz sort of thing. And what a lot of people don't know is that their data that they were collecting through those quizzes helped them create segments for when they started to deliver further content to. And they were using that information to create the profile and understand what somebody ate for breakfast, what Disney character they were, and then from that say like, oh, 10 problems that only so and so has or such and such understands, and using that to create this cycle of content that was always going to resonate and then share. And then Facebook changed their algorithm because they were taking over too much, and that's a whole different story. But and because things that worked yesterday don't work today, right? um all right, let's break into the next section here, where I want to learn about your process for creating content from ideation to publication. And moreover, what does that team structure look like?
I'm going to start with ideation. Where do ideas come from? And honestly, my content strategy for this comes from my like thesis advisor in college. When I graduated, I said, I was like, okay, I'm going to write a novel. That's going to be the thing that I do after college. That's what I'm super passionate about. And when I went to my professor, he was like, that's really great, but you've not lived your life yet. Like, what are you going to write about? The first part of writing is living, and it's also reading. Like, have you read all of the books that are going to help inform that novel? And so I think that that's a really important part of the content strategy is, have you read enough? Do you know enough? Are you an expert in this? Can you actually add to this conversation and add value? Because if you're just going to regurgitate what someone else has said or what someone else has done, readers are going to see through that. People are really smart. And you can't underestimate that power. And so, one of the things that I love to do with the teams that I lead is we have an article club. And once every 2 months, once every month, everybody brings an article that they've read that they found inspiring or interesting from a personal standpoint. And when we all talk together about all of the different interests, the diversity of experiences, the diversity of ideas, it naturally creates new types of content that we can tell for our given audience and our given purpose. You have to be ready to be inspired by anything. If you've hit a wall, if you're not inspired, go for a walk, go volunteer somewhere. Make sure that you are open to inspiration in every aspect of your life, and the content will follow, because then you can apply the strategies, apply the listening, apply the business objectives, and begin to sculpt that seed of an idea, that seed of inspiration into something that's really useful.
So when I was at Shopify, we did this. I with my teams every week we'd have our weekly stand up, and would I would always ask, what was the one thing that stood out to you this week? What was your, what was the one thing that inspired you this week? And it got people on the team really thinking about like trying to keep that in mind to like be inspired by something, right? I think that goes beyond just the work that we're doing, it really gets people engaged with it. That's what we found. One of the other things we did was I would put a stock image of just some random person looking like they were doing some kind of job and say, give me 5 minutes and tell me what this person's doing. Like, why did they do it? And then we have everybody vote with emojis to say like who they thought the best interpretation was, and then they get like a $10 gift card. Let's talk about the information exchange that happens between the different parts of the org, um, when you're coming up with the ideation.
I think it's really important to understand the goals of the organization and also to understand that the goals will change. You might join an organization, and the number one thing that they're concerned about is converting and turning people that come to the website into subscribers, or people that create an account, or people that sign up for a product, or people that follow social media, right? Like, what is the actual objective of the business? And once you find out what that objective is and who the audience is, like who do you want to take that action, then it's all about aligning those ideas with your collaborators. Because I know what I don't know, and I don't know how to develop a website. I don't know how to, create a site navigation bar. Like, I don't know how to do the data science in particular. And it's important that you are working on an idea that has come from that collaboration and come from that sharing of knowledge, that you can all move in unison. Because companies that don't work together and don't collaborate effectively can't be successful, because then you have resources competing against one another. And the content team or the editorial team, we're the tip of the spear, right? So people are going to read that content, they're going to see that content, and that's in many ways that the top of the funnel. That's where we're going to move them down, and we're going to turn them into champions, advocates, customers, whatever we need as a business. And you don't work in isolation in content. You've got to know who you're passing the baton off to, and are you giving them what they need to be successful? Because content doesn't exist on like in isolation. We're always part of an ecosystem. So understanding what your like cross-functional stakeholders need to be successful, and make sure you're not fighting against the grain. Like, there's going to be stuff that you try that doesn't work, but there's also going to be stuff that works well for you but not for your other teams, and you can't have an ego about that. As a creator, right? That's fundamentally what content is. We're creating things, we're storytellers. We're never going to run out of ideas. You can't be afraid, and you can't be precious that something that you really wanted to do or something that you really believed in isn't going to happen or isn't helpful. You're going to have 1,000 more ideas. Like, you can let it go and focus on the ones that help the business holistically.
And you're the most frequently published arm of the company, so being the tip of the spear, it's important to represent everybody holistically. Now, when you've structured your teams, right, because that's what a lot of our audience kind of thinks about, what does that look like with the teams that you oversee? And this is more broadly, not just applying to Asana, but um, with the teams that you oversee, and then those relationships with the external stakeholders. What's that look like?
I've got it's similar to the internet. It needs to be able to change. It needs to be flexible. I've been in positions where a print team was separate from a digital team, and they never spoke to each other and they never worked together. How do you bridge the gap between those things and point out where they align and where they can help each other? I've worked at companies where we had 11 people on the editorial team and grew it to 65 and 4 departments. How does that happen? I think, especially when it
How
comes
does that
to
happen?
how does that really hard work and really smart people, which is the second part of it. Like, as a leader, you not only have to understand what the business needs, but also what your employees need, what your teams need, what are their passions, and make sure fundamentally that people are not only working for the company but also working for their careers. Are they doing the work that they're going to be the most proud of in their careers, because that's how you're going to get more engagement. That's how you're going to get better ideas from your people, is remind them that when they're working for this company, they're also working for themselves. And when it comes to like a reorg or a team development or something like that, if you know what people are passionate about, you can put them in a place because you know that Venn diagram of their passions and the business's needs. And people's passions change. People want to explore different things. So, can you align the right resources with the right results? And then you can really, change anything, develop anything, evolve anything.
And as a leader, making sure that you're paying attention to the change that needs to happen and letting that happen sort of organically, right? Um, we talked about that just a little bit before the call. I would love to talk about that a little bit more, but we need to break into the next section here. We could go on forever. I could have this conversation for forever, but let's um let's talk a little bit about your pregame before you get into an edit, right? You've gone through the ideation, you've had the conversations with the stakeholders, the piece of content has been created. Now it's time for you to take a look. What comes next?
Well, the first thing is, it's really important, I think, when you're working with me or when you're working with any editor, is that editors are going to edit, right? Like, it doesn't matter if the piece is perfect, if you followed the instructions, no matter what, if you absolutely nailed it. If you show an editor something, they will find suggestions and they will find edits. And so thinking about it from that collaboration aspect is really important. I am there, just like we talk about how a writer is there to help the reader, an editor is there to help the writer and to help the story. And both sides of it are absolutely necessary. But before I go into an edit, I really want to understand what the goals of the piece are. So that question, who is it for? How does it help them? Where is this content going to be, sent out? Does it align with the brand mission and values? Is this person who's writing about it an expert? Do they have authority on this topic? And is the answer that is the most important in there, which is, so what? So what? Right? The number one question that gets to the best story is, you work with a writer and they say, this is it. And you say, so what? And then they say something else. And then you say, so what? And you keep going and you keep going until there's that moment where the idea becomes the purest form. Yeah. And it's really centered around, this is what I'm going to give the world that the world has never had before. This is the so what.
And it sounds like, because everybody's, if you're engaged as an editor, it's about everybody pushing each other's skills a little bit further and a little bit further. Nobody should be content with the first draft. Yeah.
No, I mean, the first draft is really about, did I organize these ideas in the right way? Did I talk to all of the right people to make it really strong? Did I take care of grammar and punctuation? Because those are true distractions for any editor. An editor doesn't want to have to edit grammar and punctuation. They want to be able to edit ideas. And so that's really, I think, important in a first draft, is you have to not only know it's not the last draft, but also present your work in a way where you feel it's complete, right? Because if you're an editor and you're reading through a piece and you say, hey, like, I'm not sure what this means, and the writer says, yeah, I don't know what it means either, I wanted you to figure it out. Like, that's not going to work. I want you to try your absolute best to complete this draft, so that way I'm working at a way that I actually can push you forward. Because if I'm in minutia, then I can't even see the ideas to help you edit those things, because there's a wall between the ideas and the expression, which is sort of the medium, right? Like,
Hmm.
you wouldn't ever show someone a blurry photo, right? And be like, do you like this photo? And then the person would be like, I can't see it, right? Don't let the technical stand in the way of the ideas.
I'm going to ask you a question I've never asked on the show before. which is, how are you sharpening your skills as an editor?
Reading. Reading is really, 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 really important. Also, I love getting edited as well. I think that, I luckily most of the people I've worked with in my career, I think are fantastic and amazing. And so when I'm writing an email, because or an Asana task, right? Because people are like, "Oh, what do you write?" I'm like, "Emails, Asana tasks." I don't really write stories anymore, but boy do I write. But talking about, did I write this well? Did I abide by the things that I hold dear? Also seeing how other people edit and looking at the things that they notice from their point of view. The other thing you can do is like get outside of your brain and ask yourself, okay, this pass, I'm only going to look at the subheads and I'm not going to read anything else from the story. And I'm just going to ask myself, were these subheads effective? Did they push me further down in the story? Were they captivating in some way? And to sort of like break down the content in sort of a deconstructed way where you can think about each piece of it as its own entity, right? Because you can never expect that someone will read everything in the way that an editor reads everything. But if you can look at each piece and then look at it as a whole, or look at it as a whole and then look at each piece, you can see how all of that aligns. But editing, being edited, being open, also getting things wrong is really important. When I started in content marketing, I didn't necessarily understand all of the ins and outs and the technical aspects of editing this type of work, but I did know that I can make any story stronger. And that's really what I focused on, which is what I asked from other people. What is your expertise? I can make words better. So that's what I focused on.
Nice. I was actually just talking to a newer freelancer yesterday, and that was actually a big part of the conversation. He asked, how can I get better? And it was like, let's focus on individual technical pieces and really just zone in on that, right? Zero in on those areas, you know, look at what happens right after the subheader, look at your closings, and really just try to nail that. Because in aggregate, that's what ends up making a piece, great. But you can't really know how to do that if you're trying to do everything all at once. So, cool. Well, let's jump into the edit.
Was that all the questions that
That's
people
it
had?
for right now. I could we
Oh,
could go on forever, but you got a time stop. So let's take the next
okay.
half, and we'll go through the edit, and we'll see what happens as we go along here. What was your first impression of this piece?
The first impression I had of this piece was that I wasn't sure who it was for and what we wanted that person to do, and that I felt the writing, while it was very strong and elegant, it actually didn't fundamentally feel minimalistic to me. It felt like it was something for someone with a high extreme expertise and knowledge in this topic, and that was confusing because if you're professing a argument for minimalism and simplicity, shouldn't then the content be very, very simple and accessible, and what that means for the storytelling? And so the first thing I did, I was like, okay, let's take a look at this. And so something I like to do is look at the Flesh Kincaid reading score for a publication. And so you can see that the reading level for this story is college graduate, very difficult to read. So that to me confirms that it's simply too complicated to be minimalistic. And when you're writing for the internet, depending on the brand that you're working for or with, you really want to actually stay around here in eighth and ninth grade not because you expect your readers to only have that level of education, but because you know that time is really, really precious and people want to understand things very, very quickly. And so that's really what I recommend, eighth and ninth grade. If you're working for a publication that, in my time would be a tabloid or something like that, you actually want to go even lower to a fifth grade reading level. Again, not because your readers are stupid and they only graduated fifth grade, but because accessibility of the idea is key. You want people to be able to understand the incredible work that you've done.
All right, here's a question for you, because
Mhm.
the Flesh Kincaid score does come up quite a bit. When you're self-editing and you have a very difficult piece, how are you pulling that back? Or as an editor, when you get a piece like that, how are you pulling that back to make it more simple?
So I have phrases like, that's a $2 word, that's a $5 word, that's a $10 word, that's a $20 word. You can recommend somebody be like, okay, I want you to go back through this piece and put in synonyms for every single word that has three syllables. I want you to go in and get rid of every single semicolon, every single em dash, any sentence that has five commas in it, right? You can really focus on that sort of like technical expression to break things down into, in many ways, the simplest form. There's also something called, like, I think it's Hemingway, which is like an editor that helps you, turn things to be Hemingway like and very short. You also want to watch out for verb phrases or noun phrases. Passive voice is a big one. Anywhere that you can cut things down to make them smaller and sharper, then you're going to want to do that if your reading level is too high. Another thing that you can do, which is really fun that I love to do, is read the story out loud to somebody that you don't work with, that doesn't know anything about what you're talking about, and watch their face as you're speaking. See where you yourself are tripping up when you're reading that story. And a lot of times that will reveal how to cull, how to cut, where people are confused, and just don't have an ego about it, right? Like, it's okay. You're gonna write more, you're gonna rewrite more. And like, sometimes things are never done being edited, right? Like, the internet is also a living document. You may put down a piece of work and then a month later realize, wow, that was the word I was looking for. Oh my God, I totally get it now. I'm going to go fix that piece, right? Because every day we learn more, every day the internet is different. And so, like, we're so lucky that we get to work in this living medium where you can let the story actually evolve and grow as you do.
I love the idea of the internet being a living document. It's so true, and we hear that quite a bit on the show. Is that the work is never done? All right, let's bring the screen back up, and we'll continue through the edit.
That would be, like, I would put that a question, which is, what is minimalism? How have we expressed this in the piece, right? So that would be my first thing. This is your promise, effectively. The other thing is, I would point out, this is a cliche. When you start any story or include a cliche, sometimes they're unavoidable. But when you use a cliche, you're telling the reader that this story has already been told. Less is more. I've heard that a million times. I don't need to spend my time reading this article because I'm already familiar with that concept. It doesn't catch my eye. The headline is really, really important as something I sort of say is a scroll stopper. That's the experience most people confront content in. They're in the line at Starbucks. They're about to order the coffee, but it's a really long line. And they're just like scrolling through their feed. You want to be able to write a headline that stops them in their scroll, something that speaks to them immediately, that puts them at the center of the story. Is this a scroll stopper? Did we rely on cliches? And one of the ways you can like fix a cliche is invert it. And so, like, instead of saying less is more, maybe you say more is actually less, towards minimalism in SaaS brand marketing.
So I think what's interesting, because the scroll stopping is vital now, and understanding the environment that somebody might be looking at this piece in. What stood out to me about this particular article, too, is we're talking about minimalism, but then it's several thousand words. So is it delivering on that promise?
I mean, I think this is to me a great piece to edit because there is that opportunity. I don't think it necessarily does actually follow its promise. Not only because in the course of the article, which I hope we get to, it talks a lot about visual language
Hmm.
and the simplicity and elegance of like logos like Nike or Apple that are instantly recognizable. And yet the copy doesn't use the visual language of punctuation or bullets or subheads or pull quotes or anything that actually organizes the information in a hierarchical way that allows someone to skim it and know what it means instantly. And so that was another area that I noted where, and we can even see it on the actual website. So when I look at this, we've got boldings, right? We've got these headlines, we've got these lines, but the way it's constructed is I'm not really incentivized into reading the copy. It has organized itself in a way where I only feel like I can read the headlines. And this is fundamentally a could be a bullet list, right? Could we use this as, the 5 tips to build practical minimalism, right? And introduce all of those tips up here so people know what's coming. I also think it's really wide just from a like site standpoint. It's very rare for someone to read this far across the screen. I think in one version of my life, it was something like 600 pixels is the best depth of copy. Don't quote me on that. I know I said it, but yeah, I think it's actually really hard to read this. And that doesn't mean that it isn't great content, but are we making it easy on the reader? Because minimalism is about ease.
What's interesting to me, I did some research on for an article I wrote years ago about typography in particular, and there are studies that have found. New York Times did a study when it came to both the size of the font that they were using and the type of font that they were using, and how much recall happened when they changed the size. And one of the other things to consider, and this is, I think, I'm glad that you brought up the published version, is that what's the distance away from the screen that a person is reading at? And then what's your target audience? Because the older people get, the more their eyes sort of need some help. So if you're thinking about those two things from a design standpoint, that's really important because it comes down to that's still content, right?
Yeah.
Um, Along those lines, right? Now, this is an individual who has created this for their website. If you were working within an org, how would you bring that conversation up to somebody inside the organization about typeface and readability and all of that?
You have to ask yourself what's in your control and what's not in your control. And so, usually, a content team doesn't necessarily have control over the environment that the design team, the engineering team, the WebEx team, maybe the growth marketing team has put in place based on their knowledge and their expertise. So, you're not necessarily going to say, okay, I want to change the font on this. It's more, am I working with the font? Am I fighting against the font? Am I using the tools that I need? Have I actually told the right story for the right medium? And it may be that this actual story or these ideas are better as a conversation or as a video, right? Maybe that's the right expression of this idea. But in a lot of ways, the restraints of a website's technical abilities should be inspiring, right? Because you want to make sure the story matches the medium. And if you're fighting against the design, then you're basically trying to, wrap a square like box in, around whatever, like you're just not going to. I'm trying to think like like when you're wrapping gifts, right?
Yeah,
Like
for
you
sure.
need the right wrapping paper for the shape and size of the gift. And if these things don't work, it's not going to look like a present. It's not going to be fun to open. Like work within the medium and the constraints of the medium, because on the other side, if you were able to do anything you wanted, it would also be incredibly confusing, because too much choice and too many options are going to be even worse. And so don't fight the design. Use the design. The design is the road that you travel on. You know.
I love that answer. I think a lot of where at least my head went to, having the political conversation and making a bit of a stink about it if you needed to show the research and whatnot. But the idea of working within the limitations of what you have available, I think, is really valuable. And I would venture to guess, and then we'll jump back into the edit, but I would venture to guess that might have something to do with the journalism background.
Oh, yeah. I mean, journalism. Journalism is a place where the tools that a lot of the places I worked with, there was like they're just not as fast as best practices. Websites can be really old. Like a journalism company, isn't a development company. It isn't a design company. You've got to work within the boundaries that are there, and like just make sure the story matches what's possible in the design. You're never going to have infinite options, right? And you also need to think about brand consistency. You're having a conversation as a brand, as a publication, as a human being, and you don't want people to be confused, shocked, and surprised when they land on an article or a piece of content because it doesn't resemble anything else the brand has ever done. There should be some consistency. Things don't have to be homogenous. It's not like, it should be cookie cutter or anything like that, but you don't want to come off as inconsistent, because then it's sort of like, what is this brand? What is the point of this? This seems hysterical. You need to have that consistency, and one of the parameters and the great parts about working within a design is it in some ways ensures consistency.
I love it. All right, let's bring the article back up. Let's talk about that a little bit more.
So this would be a little punctuation thing. Depending on your style guide, you would have spaces on either, but that's up to you and your copy editor. Um, Much more than just a website, it needs to be an effective hub of aesthetic activities. So this right here is, please simplify. What do you mean here? Can we break down? And then the other thing I would look at is today's most successful companies understand. Um, this isn't a very strong lead. The reason why it's not strong is it's sort of like saying a universal truth that we don't actually know to be true. I don't know if most successful companies understand that their online presence requires more than just a website. I think there are probably really successful companies that don't have websites, right? Like, I think that you have to hook the people with a really great question, not an answer that is unproven. So I think just from this first sentence, you're going to lose a lot of readers because they don't understand what this means. And this is presented as obvious and universal, but not necessarily something that people agree with, right? And the most important part of the story, right, is the reader. And I don't see the reader in this really just yet.
Doing the research, how would you find the reader? Because you kind of get the intent of the piece, but what would you be doing as an editor to tell them to find the reader?
So to me, I would assume that the reader is actually somebody in SaaS brand marketing, right? So we're trying to, from what I can see in the copy and in that headline, is in order to enjoy this piece, in order to for this piece to have value, you've got to be interested in SaaS brand marketing. And so a brand marketer is going to look at this through the lens of a more than just a website philosophy. Did it have effective language? Am I being sold effectively? It's actually really hard to create marketing content for marketers because they know their stuff, right? And so that sort of research, you need to ask yourself, okay, what is the Bible of brand marketing? Where are these people, joining together? What is this community like? Is this a topic that people are, engaging with and thinking about right now? And so it's definitely hard to write for yourself in some ways, but also I would imagine this writer is writing for who they want to be.
Lived experience is very important there. And if you don't have that lived experience, we've talked about this on the show before, definitely interview tons of people with that lived experience so you can understand that language that people are using and the challenges and everything else. All right.
Absolutely.
All right. Let's continue on.
Okay. Um, So, for example, instead of an effective hub of aesthetic activities, maybe we say visual representation, but even beyond visual might be the look and the feel, right? And so that would be an example. Oops. Always do suggested edits. So important. Here, I would say, I would start using those examples. The look and feel are an essential part of any brand's marketing strategy. So then I would change this and put it here. Any brand's marketing story are an essential part. Look and feel of any brand's marketing story. Really, and then we get to our essential, right? And so we've made this sentence shorter, simpler, and more to the point. With look and strategy are essential. With visual representation increasingly viewed as an indicator of quality. So again, I would take this phrase, indicator of quality, and shorten it, increasingly viewed. I would just say, with really, you can even just say with visuals viewed as a, what's a good word for indicator?
Oh, you're gonna put me on the spot now.
Yeah,
Um,
we're collaborating. Come on.
yeah, a good show of quality. No, I don't like that word. This is one of those things I would marker. There we go. Hallmark.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be my producer.
Okay.
Indicate.
Yeah, there we go. And so, we take this sentence and tell me, this sounds so much more conversational, right? The look and feel of any brand's marketing strategy are essential, with visuals viewed as a hallmark of quality, right? Like we don't have aesthetics, right? Like we're not Aristotle right now. We're not digging into that. Representation increasingly viewed, like we're just saying it like it is. Quality is important, the quality of the visuals. And so this would be a good example of where I would want this person to focus. I might at this point stop editing, honestly, and send it back to the writer and ask them to replace all of these $10 words with simpler words to cut down all of the sentences, to get rid of any verb phrases, and then, get rid of all of that complicated punctuation and then send it back to me because I can already tell the type of editing that I would be doing is too granular, necessarily for the person to learn, right? Because you never, as an editor, want to be given copy that you're required to fix or save, that doesn't result in learning, right? Like this person, I would want to work with them in a way that the next time we worked together, these were no longer issues. And so, that might be sitting down together for 3 hours and just like having them walk me through that sentence and asking them, okay, what's the $10 word here? Is there too much punctuation? And like have them, live tell me what's a better word for that thing, because you can't teach somebody, you can't help somebody if you're not working with them.
I think the developmental element of that is absolutely wonderful because it shows that you're not just having the transactional relationship. It shows that you actually care to develop the author along the way. And the honesty of that is also really important. Can you talk a little bit about how you've developed that skill, I suppose, of the empathy element of that?
um So I would say this knowledge came from not working with the strongest editors in my career that wanted to teach me. I've often felt, I've had to be my own mentor. I've had to learn things the hard way. I think the thing I always remember, which was a really bad example, was when I wrote my first ever cover story. I got this incredible interview with this very important person in fashion. I ended up somehow talking my way into, getting these amazing photographs of her. I really worked my butt off from a reporting standpoint, but I had never written anything that was 5,000 words before. And when I handed it in to an editor that I really respected and I was so excited to work with, the thing that she said to me was, I wish anyone else in the world had written this story but you. And it was incredibly devastating. It was incredibly painful. I obviously like still hear that voice in my head. I wish anyone else, did this but you. And I just never wanted to be an editor like that. Like I always, just like I think about helping the reader, I think about helping the writer to be the best that they can be, and to approach it as a coach. Um, and that's part of the reason probably I no longer work in journalism, is that environment. There just weren't a lot of really good examples of people that, um, wanted to help the
That
young
is
pub reporters.
that is devastating to hear. Oh man. Man, I've heard of some brutality, but that's a whole nother level. Yeah, we talk about the empathy aspect on the show quite a bit in that relationship because the editor is always the first reader. So that interpretation of everything, there's a level of intimacy there that needs to be respected. So it's really great to sort of hear that and really think about how you would want to be treated essentially.
Yeah, but
All
it's
right.
also the way I like to be managed personally may not be how a person that I'm managing wants to be managed. The
Okay.
goals that I have may not be that person's goals. And finding that in between where, you just sort of as an editor say, this is what I can do, this is how I like to work. Does that work for you? What do you need? Are there aspects of your writing that you want me to focus on and aspects that you don't want me to mention? There has to be those sort of like fundamental understandings of what do you want and what can I actually give you. Because if you want a lesson in grammar, like I'm probably not the right person. I know some great copy editors for that, but if you want to think about story, if you want to think about simplicity, if you want to think about organization of information, then I can help you with those things.
That's amazing. That's amazing. One of the things I've started doing a little bit more recently is asking for doing a self-assessment survey before we start working together with the building a team in general, because then we can kind of see how everybody can help each other out too and identify strengths and weaknesses along the way. We've got about 2 minutes left. I'm going to drop into the chat here a little survey. Tell us what you think about the show and any feedback that you could give so we can make this better. That would be amazing. And I would love it if you could give us some parting words and then we'll sign off.
Anytime I talk about careers or work, the most important thing is to only listen to the person that believes in you. You're going to meet a lot of people that are going to offer you a lot of advice or, neg you in some sort of way. And so when you're writing, when you're reading, when you're creating content, and you're going to get a lot of feedback, only listen to the people that believe in you.
There we go. That is absolutely incredible. Emily, thank you so much for coming on to the show. This was a really great conversation. I'd love to have you back on at some other point in time. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much for watching. If you liked that episode, please leave a comment and a like down below. And if you want to be notified about future episodes, please go to thecontentstudio.com/thecuttingroom, enter your email address. You'll also get replays and other exclusive bonuses. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next one.